Part 1. Introduction to the scene. The room was still, bathed in a soft, muted light that filtered through the large windows. Outside, the countryside stretched out like an endless sea of green and gold, gently swaying under the late summer sun. The air felt thick and warm, heavy with the scent of flowers and the faint, earthy smell of the fields beyond. It was one of those rare afternoons when time itself seemed to slow down, every minute suspended in quiet serenity. From my spot by the window, I could see the world moving lazily on the other side of the glass. A few birds flitted about, their wings slicing gracefully through the air as they dipped and soared in playful arcs. The leaves on the trees shimmered in the gentle breeze, their soft rustling the only sound breaking the silence. Farther away, a farmer's plow moved steadily through the fields, carving long, neat lines into the soil. Everything seemed so calm, so perfectly in tune with itself. Inside, however, the atmosphere was different, contained, almost stagnant. The walls of the room felt like a boundary, holding everything within them in a kind of suspended animation. The contrast between the vibrant life outside and the stillness inside was striking. I felt as though I were observing the world from behind a veil, separated from it, yet strangely drawn to it. It was then that I noticed the moth. It was small, almost insignificant against the vastness of the windowpane, fluttering weakly against the glass. Its wings, delicate and translucent, trembled as it struggled to find its way. The creature seemed lost, confused by the invisible barrier that stood between it and the open sky beyond. Each attempt to fly through was met with the unyielding surface of the glass, and yet it continued, undeterred by its repeated failures. Watching it, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. This tiny, fragile being was caught between two worlds, the freedom of the outdoors and the confinement of the indoors. It had no way of understanding why it could see the vast open space but couldn't reach it. Its movements were frantic, yet oddly beautiful, each flutter of its wings a testament to its determination. For a moment, I imagined what it would be like to be that moth, trapped in a small space, unable to reach the freedom that lay just beyond my grasp. I thought about the barriers that exist in life, some visible, others unseen, that keep us from the things we desire most. The struggle of the moth seemed to mirror, in a small way, the human experience, the longing for something just out of reach, the persistence in the face of obstacles. The scene outside continued, oblivious to the small drama unfolding on the other side of the glass. The sunlight, now tinged with the soft glow of approaching evening, bathed everything in a gentle golden hue. It was a beautiful, peaceful world, full of life and movement. And yet, here was this tiny creature, caught in its own silent battle, struggling against the confines of its existence. As I watched, I felt a strange sense of connection to the moth. Its struggle, though small and seemingly insignificant, held a certain poignancy. It was a reminder of the fragile, often futile nature of life's efforts, a symbol of resilience and the unending drive to break free, to move forward, even when the odds are against us. In that moment, the room seemed to close in around me, the stillness amplifying the moth's quiet struggle. The window, the world outside, and the tiny creature beating its wings against the glass, all of it blended together into a single poignant image. It was a scene of contrast and reflection, a quiet testament to the beauty and tragedy of existence, seen through the lens of this one, small life. Part 2. The Moth Struggle. The moth continued its desperate dance against the glass. each tiny movement filled with a sense of urgency that seemed almost human. Its wings, fragile and diaphanous, beat against the transparent barrier with a persistent rhythmic motion. From where I sat, I could see the faint pulse of life coursing through its slender body, its small form trembling with each futile attempt to break free. I watched as it flitted from one corner of the window pane to the other, searching for a way out, a gap, an opening, anything that would allow it to escape. It was a silent, heartbreaking struggle, and I found myself captivated by it, unable to look away. There was something almost noble in the moth's persistence. Despite its small size, it seemed to embody a fierce, indomitable spirit. Each time it failed to pass through the glass, it paused only for a moment before launching itself forward again. It was as if the moth believed that if it just tried hard enough, if it just pushed a little more, it would succeed. And yet, I knew that it wouldn't. The barrier was impenetrable, its strength unmatched by the moth's delicate frame. No matter how hard it tried, it would never break through to the other side. The moth's struggle, so intense and so futile, seemed a cruel reflection of the struggles we all face in life. Those moments when we find ourselves trapped, beating against invisible walls that we can neither see nor overcome. I leaned closer to the window, feeling a strange urge to help, though I knew there was little I could do. The moth's movements were growing slower now, its once vigorous flapping replaced by a weary flutter. It was tiring, its energy fading as the hours wore on. Each attempt to escape seemed to drain more of its strength, leaving it weaker and more vulnerable. The room around me seemed to fade away as I focused on the tiny creature before me. Its wings, once vibrant and full of life, now quivered with exhaustion. It clung to the glass, its body pressed against the cool surface, as if trying to draw strength from it. I could see its legs, thin and spindly, gripping onto the smooth surface. The futility of its struggle was heartbreaking. Here was a creature, so small and fragile, fighting with all its might against an obstacle it could never overcome. I thought about the times in my own life when I had felt trapped, hemmed in by circumstances beyond my control. I remembered the frustration, the helplessness, the burning desire to break free and find my way out. In the moth struggle, I saw a reflection of my own, and I wondered if that was why I felt such a deep connection to it. The room, once filled with the quiet hum of stillness, now seemed to echo with the sound of the moth's wings, a faint, persistent tapping against the glass. It was a sound that spoke of determination, of hope, of an unyielding will to survive. And yet, it was also a sound of resignation, of a fight that could never be won. As the minutes passed, the moth's movements grew more erratic, its wings fluttering weakly, as if weighed down by an invisible force. It was exhausting itself, pouring every last bit of its strength into this hopeless endeavor. I wanted to reach out, to gently guide it away from the glass, to show it that there was another way. But I knew that even if I did, it wouldn't understand. It was trapped not just by the glass, but by its own instincts, its own nature. The struggle continued, and I watched in silence, my heart aching for the tiny creature that refused to give up. The world outside the window seemed so vast, so full of promise, but for the moth, it was just a dream, a tantalizing glimpse of freedom that it could never reach. Its struggle, so small and seemingly insignificant, felt like a profound commentary on the human condition, a reminder of the barriers we all face, the battles we fight, and the courage it takes to keep going. Part 3. The Observer's Perspective. As I continued to watch the moth struggle, I became increasingly aware of my role as a passive observer. I was just sitting there, comfortably in my chair, bearing witness to this small creature's relentless fight against the impossible. The scene in front of me was, in essence, a life-and-death battle, yet I was removed from it, detached, merely looking on. I felt a strange, almost uncomfortable sense of guilt. Here I was, safe and secure, observing from behind a barrier of my own, one made not of glass, but of indifference and inaction. The moth's world was one of desperation and survival, while mine was one of stillness and contemplation. It was an unsettling contrast, this gap between its urgent, frantic movements and my calm, detached presence. I realized, too, that I was projecting my own emotions onto the moth. I saw its struggle as tragic, but did it feel the same? Was it even capable of feeling despair, or was it simply driven by some primal instinct to survive, to keep moving, to push against that which held it back? The truth was, I didn't know, and that not knowing created a distance, a barrier, between me and this tiny creature whose life seemed, in that moment, both so insignificant and so profound. My thoughts began to wander, moving beyond the room and the window to broader reflections on the nature of struggle and suffering. How often do we find ourselves, or others, in situations that feel insurmountable? Trapped in circumstances that seem impossible to escape, we flail and fight, pouring all our energy into an effort that may ultimately be futile. And yet, like the moth, we persist. We keep trying, not because we believe we will succeed, but because the act of striving itself is an affirmation of life. The scene before me was a mirror, reflecting not just the moth's struggle, but the struggles we all face, the relentless pursuit of goals, the fight against our own limitations, the painful awareness of barriers we cannot break. The moth's tiny, frantic movements were like a distillation of human experience, condensed into a brief, heartbreaking moment of time. I began to question my own role in these kinds of struggles. As an observer, what responsibility did I have? Was it enough to watch, to reflect, to draw lessons from the suffering I saw? Or did I have an obligation to act, to intervene, to try to make a difference, no matter how small? The glass between us was not just a physical barrier, but a metaphorical one, separating me from the reality of the moth's plight, and perhaps from my own sense of compassion. The thought lingered, heavy and unresolved. I was struck by the simplicity of the scene, and yet the complexity of the emotions it evoked. This tiny creature, so small and seemingly insignificant, had somehow become a catalyst for my own introspection. It was as if, in watching the moth, I was also watching myself, seeing my own struggles, my own hopes and failures, reflected back at me in the delicate beat of its wings. The moth continued to fight, its body pressed against the glass, its wings trembling with exhaustion. And I continued to watch, feeling a deep, inexpressible connection to this fragile creature. Part 4. The Moment of Realization. As I watched the moth struggle intensify, a sudden clarity washed over me. In that small, fluttering creature's desperate attempts to break free, I glimpsed something profound, something both unsettling and illuminating. This tiny being, so seemingly insignificant, was engaged in a battle that resonated far beyond the confines of the window pane. It was not just the moth's struggle that I was witnessing, but the very essence of life itself. The moth, with its delicate wings and fragile body, was utterly alone in its plight. It was not just the moth's struggle that I was witnessing, but the very essence of life itself. The moth, with its delicate wings and fragile body, was utterly alone in its plight. Yet, it continued to push forward, to fight against the invisible force that held it back. There was no audience for its efforts, no reward awaiting it on the other side of the glass. Its struggle was, in essence, a solitary act, a testament to the indomitable spirit that drives all living things, no matter how small, to keep moving, to keep striving, even when success seems impossible. I realized then that this tiny creature's relentless fight was not just a struggle against its immediate circumstances, but against something much larger, the inevitability of its own limitations. It was a poignant reminder of how we all, in our own ways, are confined by the invisible barriers of our lives, our fears, our doubts, our mortality. We push against them, yearn to break free, to transcend the boundaries that define us, knowing deep down that we are bound to them as surely as the moth was to the glass. In that moment, I saw a reflection of the human condition in the moth's fragile form. We, too, are caught in our own battles, often unseen and unrecognized, fighting against the constraints of our existence. And like the moth, we often find ourselves pressing up against invisible walls, our efforts seemingly futile, our strength dwindling. But the moth's struggle was not without meaning. Its very act of resistance, its refusal to surrender, spoke to a truth that lay at the heart of existence itself. To live is to struggle, to resist, to fight against the forces that seek to confine us. The moth's persistence, even in the face of overwhelming odds, was a quiet affirmation of life's inherent value. It was a reminder that every moment of striving, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, is a testament to the resilience of the living spirit. As I watched the moth's wings beat ever more faintly against the glass, I felt a deep sense of empathy and admiration. The moth's struggle, though tragic, was also beautiful in its defiance. It was a reminder that, even in our weakest moments, we are driven by an unstoppable force, the desire to keep moving forward, to keep reaching for the light, even when the darkness closes in. Part 5. The Final Struggle. The moth's movements grew weaker, its wings slowing to a feeble flutter. I watched, captivated by the quiet drama unfolding before me, as its tiny body, once so full of life, began to tremble with exhaustion. There was something almost sacred about this fragile creature, fighting so desperately against the inevitable. It was as if the moth embodied the very essence of resistance, of perseverance in the face of insurmountable odds. Its struggle, though poignant, was becoming increasingly painful to witness. Each attempt to lift itself off the windowsill seemed to sap the last of its energy. The once frantic beating of its wings slowed to a delicate quiver, each movement a testament to the life force that still flickered within it. Yet, the outcome was inevitable. The moth was losing the battle, its strength waning with each passing moment. As I watched the moth in its final struggle, a deep sadness washed over me. It was more than just the sadness of watching a life come to an end. It was the recognition of something larger, something deeply human. In that small creature's fight for life, I saw a reflection of our own struggles against time, against fate, against the inexorable march toward the unknown. The moth's fragile form seemed to carry the weight of all our battles, all our fears, and all our hopes. And then, almost imperceptibly, the moth stopped moving. Its wings, which had once been a blur of motion, lay still. The tiny body, which had trembled with effort, became quiet and motionless. The struggle was over. I felt a strange sense of finality, a quiet acceptance settling over the room. The life that had fought so valiantly, so fiercely, had finally given way to the stillness of death. There was no dramatic end, no sudden cessation of movement. The moth's passing was a gentle fading, a gradual slipping away from the world it had tried so hard to hold on to. It lay there, its delicate form bathed in the soft light of the afternoon sun, a small, silent witness to the fleeting nature of existence. For a moment, time seemed to pause, the world outside the window growing distant and indistinct. In the silence that followed, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. The moth's struggle, though tragic, had also been beautiful in its defiance. It had fought until the very end, embodying a quiet, unyielding courage. In its small, silent way, the moth had reminded me of the resilience and fragility of life, of the delicate balance between hope and despair. As I sat there, gazing at the tiny, lifeless form, I realized that the moth's struggle was not in vain. It had shown me something profound about the nature of existence, about the value of every moment, no matter how brief or seemingly insignificant. The moth, in its final act, had transformed an ordinary afternoon into a meditation on life, on the beauty and tragedy of the human condition. And so, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, I turned away from the window, carrying with me the memory of that small, brave creature. The room felt different now, quieter, more reflective. The moth's brief, brilliant struggle had ended, but its impact lingered, a quiet echo in the stillness of the afternoon. It had fought, it had lived, and in its passing, it had left a lasting impression, a reminder that life, in all its forms, is both fragile and fiercely resilient.